Hey everyone, so one of the questions I get asked a lot is which is the best Bible translation? To help answer that question, I want us to think about different cars used for different purposes. If we're going to go racing around Kyalami, we're going to be using a sports car. However, if we go into the bush, we're going to be using a 4x4. And the more we understand in the same way the functions of different Bible translations, I think you and I will be better equipped to navigate the world of all of these Bible translations. You see, language is notoriously difficult to translate. I still remember watching Seven Dalan and hearing the Afrikaans, seeing the English at the bottom of the screen and saying to myself, yeah, they pretty much got that. However, there's some nuances in Afrikaans they weren't quite able to pick up in the English. And the same is true when it comes to our English translation of these ancient languages. So what translators have done is they've chosen different philosophies of translation. And so on this side is what is known as a literal translation or a formal equivalence translation. This is where for every Greek word or every Hebrew word, they are looking for a single English word. Examples of those would be what I've got here is the ESV, otherwise the King James Version, the New American Standard Version. And the advantage of a literal translation is that you're going to preserve technical accuracy and grammar and syntax. Some of the weaknesses, however, are that these translations can feel a little bit wooden, a little bit blocky, because they don't quite flow in the same way that the language that we speak with flows today. Another weakness is that because they're committed to one word, to a single word, sometimes the word doesn't have an English equivalent, and so they choose a word that maybe allows for a little bit of ambiguity. Let me give you an example here. Psalm 10 verses 15 in the ESV says, "Break the arm of the wicked." However, in a different translation, a dynamic equivalence translation, it says, "Break the power of the wicked." And here we can see the difference between a word-for-word understanding versus an idea understanding, which takes us to the next type of translation, which is a dynamic equivalence translation. Example would be the NIV, and this is the Bible that I use most of the time. Another dynamic equivalent translation is the NLT, the New Living Translation. And instead of going for word, for the most part, they are going to, as far as possible, stick to a word-for-word translation. But when there is a word that there is no simple English word for it, they are going to look for ideas or phrases that are going to better communicate the idea behind this word. So some of the weaknesses are you lose out on some of the technical grammatical accuracy, but what you're gaining is that they're simpler to read and they can sometimes communicate ideas with a little bit more accuracy. So that's kind of in the middle, and then on this side you get paraphrases, and this is when they are committed really to communicating the ideas, and whatever the idea is, they're going to use their own words to help you understand the concept of what's going on in the original language. So of course you're going to be losing out on pretty much all grammatical accuracy, but hopefully what you're going to get with a good paraphrase is that, again, they are going to read quite easily and they're going to communicate the ideas very well. And a very good example of the paraphrase is The Message, all right, written by Eugene Peterson. Which brings us back to the original question, which translation is best? And so here's a few things to keep in mind. I want to suggest, firstly, that you get a translation that really fits where you're at. If you're a brand new Christian, you're simply wanting to understand the big ideas of the faith. Maybe you want to go for an NIV or an NLT in the middle, or maybe a paraphrase. However, as you grow and develop, maybe you want to think about having multiple translations. Maybe you want to have a paraphrase. Maybe you want to have something in the middle as well. And maybe you want to also extend yourself and get a literal translation like the ESV as well. You see, one of the ways we can use this is when we look at the range of translations, for the most part, we're going to see high levels of agreement. But there are going to be those odd places where they seem to come at this word or at this idea from different angles. And what I want to suggest to you is that we don't see these translations competing with one another, but complementing one another. Usually at the heart of these differences is a word or a concept in the original language that is very hard to describe in our language. And so if each of these translations are shining a light on this idea, it's only going to enhance your understanding of that idea. And then finally, just think about the intended purpose of the translation. I don't believe at this stage of the game that we need to pit these translations against one another. Think and not or. Think about the purpose of the translation and you will be able to get all you need out of it. But I do want to put one final thought out there, and that is, while I believe most of these translations are reliable and they work well in their lane in order to preserve the message of Scripture, I do want to throw a little bit of caution out there concerning the Passion Translation, and I know that's an uncomfortable thing to say. If you want to find out more about that, I'm going to send out the link to your life group leaders, and you can go and follow up and find out more about that. But for the most part, we have these translations available to us. Let's let them all grow and enhance our understanding and our reading of Scripture.